Welcome to Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos, the podcast where we explore the tools, the ideas, and the conversations that help us live longer, safer, and more independently in our senior years. Today, I'm joined by Ashton Applewhite, author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. It's an incredibly thought-provoking book on aging. She's one of the leading voices challenging how we literally think about getting older. Ashton's work focuses on a simple but powerful idea that ageism isn't just something that happens to us, it's something we carry with us, often without even realizing it. She's spoken everywhere from the TED main stage to the United Nations and was named one of the UN's Healthy Aging 50 leaders working to make the world a better place to grow older. Ashton, I am thrilled you're here with us today on Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos.
Thank you, Garrison. Good to be here.
I think from my perspective, my experience, most people wouldn't actually say I'm ageist, but they still might feel uneasy about getting older. What's going on there, and where does that discomfort come from?
Well, it comes at us in countless ways every day in Western culture. We are there, the messages out there are that younger is better, that it's sad to be old, that older people are incompetent, on and on and on. The devaluing in the workplace, in the entertainment industry, you name it, that the best survival strategies to cling to the flotation cushion of youth or pretend youth for as long as we possibly can. And of course, that's impossible and divisive and destructive, individually and collectively.
Is it something you mentioned culture? Is it something that we grow up with from TV commercials and radio ads and cosmetic sales? Is it something we absorb over time? When did you first notice it as this big a factor?
Uh, well, it is both inside us and embedded in the structures and systems around us. I started thinking about this and writing about it in my mid 50s, almost over 20 years ago. I'm 73, so mid, whatever. I've been at it for a while because I realized like I was really sort of anxious and sort of free floating, not quite dread, but apprehension about the years ahead. So I started digging into why I was so afraid. And this was, or so unnerved, afraid is overstating it a little bit. And I had a word cloud. Remember those from the ancient days of blogs where the words,
Do I ever?
prominent, get bigger. And ageism was a big part of that. And ageism is discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of age. It's being untreated unfairly because of your age. We are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about someone or a group of people on the basis of how old we think they are. And spoiler alert, we are all ageist. This stuff takes up residence in our heads at an early age, in early childhood, when attitudes towards race and gender start to form. And one of the many things, I knew nothing starting out. One of the many things that surprised me was that we older people can be the most ageist of all because we have had a lifetime of swimming in these waters, in these ideas, and they are also captured in the economic systems around us, social systems, educational systems. So unless we stop to challenge them, they become part of our identity. So older people are not only not immune to ageism, we are often very active perpetuators.
I love your wordsmithing, especially in your book. And you've
Thank
been
you.
known to assert that ageism is prejudice against our future selves. And I've come to hold that up as a banner. What does that actually look like in real life, that prejudice against our future selves?
Let me just make one qualifier here, Garrison, is that coinage, that phrase is not original to me. I'm pretty sure it first appeared in a book titled Ageism by a scholar named Todd Nelson. It is, however, in my opinion, an idea that everyone who thinks hard about this stuff arrives at, because every prejudice requires an other, an outgroup, other sports team, other skin color, other something. One more qualifier is that ageism, again, is any judgment on the basis of age, including too young. You can think less of yourself as a young person. You might assume a younger person is less qualified, etc. That's ageism too. Younger people experience a lot of it, especially since in Western culture, you can be old at 15 if you're a model, right? There's all these young women shooting themselves up with stuff to prevent wrinkles. So it starts young. So, but the larger point is we are a very youth-centric culture, and most discrimination and negativity is directed at later life. In the other is our own future older selves, the person we will actually become, and which is a pretty destructive way to go through life, dreading your future.
Boy, it certainly is. Oh my gosh, the way you said that, absolutely. How much of what limits people as they age is physical versus how much is a what they've come to believe, that going back to that social slash cultural factor, what is the balance there?
Well, that's a great question. And of course, it is different for all of us. There are people leading lives with chronic illness who are seriously mobility impaired, whose lives are full of joy and meaning. And there are full of people who can run a marathon and have all the toys in the world who are miserable and arguably most worried about their future because perhaps they have a lot of privilege and they are under the, in my opinion, delusion that they can somehow stop aging or stop the signs of aging. So it's utterly, utterly individual. A lot of what we think of as ageism is actually ableism, which is discrimination, prejudice, stigma around how our minds and bodies function, right? That's what older people, that's what people with disabilities face. That is the reason that so many older people refuse to use walkers or wheelchairs or even canes, even when the alternative is never going out. And so the question of, and of course, you can be born with a disability. You can be temporarily disabled if you're in a car accident and so on. None of these things are intrinsically linked to a given age. That said, in general, our bodies work less well over time. You know, I can't move as fast as I used to and so on. So I don't want to just paint, I'm no Pollyanna. I'm not saying, oh, read my book and change your attitude and you will, jump rope to the end of life without ever having any physical problems. But it is important to distinguish between fears around physical and cognitive function and actual age, because at any age, there are people younger than you who can or cannot do that thing. And same is true of people older than you. It is never explicitly tied to age. Does that answer your
I
question?
see. Yes, I see a lot of what you're talking about. That ableism, certainly as people grow older and they're still in the workforce, how they're tagged either by themselves or others as unable to move with the workforce or to feel competent. I see that play out there a lot.
I bet.
I want to get to what is described as the aging equals decline narrative. You push back on the idea that aging is a problem or a crisis. Why is that narrative so persistent?
Because we live in a hyper-capitalist society and no one makes money off satisfaction is one reason, right? If I can be persuaded that my wrinkles are a huge problem, I'm going to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on procedures which probably will make me feel better. They may or may not make me look better, but or the natural changes that accompany aging, changes in your hormone levels. I am not a doctor. I am not saying that there are not hormone related medical issues that require medical treatment, but look at the huge growth in discussion around perimenopause. If you've tracked that, no one talked about menopause when I was going through it, and certainly not when my mother did. It's wonderful people are talking about it. The reason of the silence was there because it is a double whammy for women. Our worth in a capitalist and sexist and patriarchal world is tethered to our reproductive capacity and how youthful we look, right? Which is a terrible, terrible, shallow, classist, elitist, destructive system, but those are the waters we swim in, right? So the sooner we can zoom out and see those larger structures at work, the better off we are. There are real things to worry about getting older, getting sick, ending up alone, right? Running out of money, especially in a heartless society that has very little social safety net and all this emphasis on independence and no emphasis on interdependence and on the absolute necessity and beauty of asking for help all the time and practicing before you can't get up without it, right? But we live in this culture that fosters these fears, and they are real.
And I presume from what you're saying is that people give up on their capabilities sooner than they really need to. And I have to believe that mindset influences outcome.
Boy, are you right about that? I mean, think about how many people think, classically, I'm too old for that. You might mean you're too intimidated because you're shy. I mean, I don't want to do anything athletic in public, for example. It's just terrifying to me when we tend to. But if you hear that all these messages about incapacity tied to age, you might be too tired. You might not have enough money. You might have done it yesterday. You might be too out of shape. You might be faster than everyone in the group, or you might have or are more accomplished in that field, and you don't want to do an exercise or something at that level. It is never about age, but most of us haven't stopped to think about it, right? We've thought some about racism, we've thought some about sexism, right? Maybe we've thought about our body image and fat phobia and all that stuff. Age is sort of the last big category to go relatively unexamined. But boy, once you start to think about it, I guarantee that, I will guarantee that no one can read my book or read my stuff that I've written. And by the way, if you don't want to buy my book, I've been writing about it for free out loud on my blog, and you can do that instead. You will feel better about the years ahead because you will realize these larger forces that want you to be afraid, that want you to buy crap you don't need, and that want you, one more point, that want you to be separated by age. It's the old divide and conquer. Think of moms in the paid workforce arguing with stay-at-home moms about who's a better mom. That's a dumb fight. How about women join forces to close the gender wage gap so that more women could choose whether or not to stay home? It's not about old versus young, right? The entrenched power structures benefit when we are squabbling about who's a better mom instead of joining forces to create a more egalitarian society.
Staying on that positive note about your book, This Chair Rocks, A Manifesto Against Ageism, it is truly captivating for the one reason that it is so mindset changing and motivating at the same time. It's a book that I absolutely agree with you. It will totally change a reader's mindset on looking forward and not being stuck in the proverbial ageist trenches, if you will. I think that's, I'm promoting your book now here too, but it's one of the major selling points is it's hard enough to put the book down, but you almost can't because it so captures your total way of thinking and puts a spin on it that will reverse the path anybody's going down to
Wow.
going up.
I wish I'd gotten you to write me a blurb. Thank you so much for your generous words. I appreciate it. I love your focus on mindset because, of course, mindset isn't going to reverse a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or bring you out of poverty. People face different obstacles to a good old age. But more and more data shows, and it's fascinating, that attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function. The role of mindset in health as we age is crucially important. So it is key to good. When I started out, by the way, thank you for those good words about my book. I want to say I am very, very careful about the sources I cite and that there is solid science behind them. And I could not say 20 years ago, ageism makes you sick. And now I can't. There is tons of data correlating more positive, and I like to say more accurate beliefs about aging, because I don't want to sugarcoat the hard stuff, that they correlate with longer lives, an average of 7.5 years longer, people walking faster, people healing more rapidly, even from a severe injury or illness over and over and over. And if you want to see the research, my website is This Chair Rocks. If you go to thischairrocks.com/blog, you will see the most recent post up there is a finding by a woman named Becca Levy at Yale, who has done most of the research. And her latest research shows that these, she calls them positive age beliefs, can reverse cognitive and physical decline. So it's a big study, and it upends with really solid major longitudinal study of many thousands of older adults, this idea that growing older is a one-way path to physical and or cognitive decline.
And isn't part of that reversing decline actually tied in with helping the healing process itself, our own attitudes about, let's say, having some major surgery, I don't know, a knee replacement, a shoulder replacement, how we perceive the place of that surgery in our lives? Doesn't our whole attitude affect how our healing is going to progress?
It certainly does, and it affects it at 22, just like it does at 82, right? It's at every point. I mean, Western. I'm no Buddhist. Many friends are, and I maybe it's something I should aspire to. But we tend to be ignorant of or dismissive of the mind-body connection. And our attitude plays a huge role in how we move through life. And again, which I would have known going in, but I wouldn't have known about the connection to actual physical and cognitive function at the cellular level.
I want to go back to that broader lens that you started talking about earlier. You've connected ageism to sexism, ableism, even racism. How do those overlap or intersect? And why is aging experienced differently depending on who each of us is?
Well, I'll lead with the fact that I thank heavens I don't have to pick what one idea I'd like to put out in the world, but one of the top contenders is, and this again is science. The wonky way to put it is that the defining characteristic of later life is heterogeneity. I say that as the longer we live, the more different from one another we become, right? Every newborn is unique, but 30-year-olds have way more in common developmentally, physically, socially than 50-year-olds, and so on out. So there's that. You asked about how these different forms of prejudice intersect. There's a big clunky word for that we owe to the brilliant legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw: intersectionality. I don't love the word as a writer. It doesn't sound great to my ear, but it is the idea that there are these different characteristics, what someone sounds like, what someone looks like, where they're from, how old they are, et cetera, that are things we use to socially locate people And that it is that combination of factors in each of us. And privilege has a lot to do with it. Can you afford good health care? How much stress do you have to live with, and so on, that shape each of our aging. It is hard. I mean, I can make a case that, but not with a straight face, that aging is hardest for white men. But in a certain sense, ageism is often the first prejudice that white men encounter. And for the ones brave enough and vulnerable enough, and that's a big ask. I'm not being snarky here to say, oh, this is what everyone else in the world is up against, being discriminated against because of something they can't change about themselves. And it sucks, right? That part can be very, very hard for men, especially if at the very top of the economic food chain are these, mostly young, mostly white, very wealthy, longevity people, longevity scientists, and their clients who really think they can stop aging and that somehow they're not going to grow old and they're not going to die. And P.S., the world would be a better place if they never left it. That was snarky on purpose, but not the rest of it. But all these aspects of our identity and forms of privilege and discrimination intersect in each of us to shape our experience. It's harder to age as a woman because ageism and sexism are intertwined in ways I already referenced. We are punished for appearing to age, God forbid. If you are a woman of color, you face triple barriers, right? If you have a disability, it's harder yet. The good news is, and that can be a very heavy idea. I remember thinking, geez, all these layers of, stuff making it hard to make your way in the world on your own terms. The good news is, in my opinion, that when we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie any prejudice, right? They're all based on stereotypes, and no stereotype can possibly be true. There's nothing that is true of a massive, group of people. If they just share one characteristic, skin color or age, for example. When we chip away at any one of them, because they are interrelated and depend on each other to persist, we chip away at the whole edifice. It is not zero sum. When you are working to become less racist or become less ageist, it's going to change your thinking and help change it out in the world. If you think a little bit differently, you take that change out with you out the door when you leave, you change the world.
I love your self-descriptive term, pro-aging radical. I love that term. That has so stuck with me. I've written it down on several Post-its and in my notebook. When you use that term for yourself, how do you want it to resonate when others hear that?
Well, it's funny. I would probably say it a little differently now. There's things I don't say like, there's lots of things I say differently. I want a world in which aging is neutral, in which age is neutral, in which I can say I'm 73. It's an important part of my identity. It's an important part, at the doctor's office of my history. But I would like that number to be on the second page of my doctor's chart and on the second page of my dating profile, so that we can push back against attaching a value to that age, right? I don't think old people deserve to be put on pedestals because we're old. Maybe we need a low pedestal to sit on because our knees hurt. But there's also going to be a young person whose knees hurt and a middle-aged person who's holding a kid who needs to sit too, right? That's what I mean from decoupling it from age. I don't want younger people to have more intrinsic value or older people. I want a world where we acknowledge our age. Being young is different from being old. And but in terms of the pro-aging radical, no one actually wants to go back to their youth. They think they do for a minute.
So true.
That's the question. But then I'm like, no, you don't get to just swap out the knee cartilage. You have to erase the slate. And no matter how apprehensive people are, we know that our years make us us. And for women in particular, once you start, whether by choice or by force, to be liberated, freed of some of these constraints and judgment and pressure to perform according to these horrible, standards, it's really liberating. And for many women, later life is the best time of all.
Ashton, what prompted you, what motivated you to write This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism? What happened in your career, in your life, that you said, I've got to write this book?
Um, I have a terrible answer. I never wanted to write another book. I had written a previous book. It was the most horrible thing I'd ever done. And I'm like, thank God I don't have to write another book. I can just blog and tweet and be a modern communicator. But haha, writing a book is useful in the world. And I don't have a meet cute kaboom moment for you either. I have been self-employed for a long time, so I'm sure that there were work opportunities that I didn't get because I was too old or too female or not female enough or whatever. But there was no one moment. It was more that there was the cumulative moments of looking in the mirror and going, oh, this getting old thing is actually happening to me, which I think one of the reasons that's hard to acknowledge is because we live in a world that says, don't think about it. It's all going to suck. It's horrible. But I also think it's human. We age slowly, and it's just hard to imagine as a kid, right? Why would you sit when you could run around, right? We age slowly. But I was, as I said, in my mid 50s, and I'm like, oh, damn, I'm not going to be the only human who doesn't get old. Why am I so apprehensive about it? And I'm not an academic, but I am nerdy. And I started out interviewing people over 80 who work, was the genesis of this project, and learning about longevity. And the more I learned, the less fear it held, and the more pissed off I got about all the social and economic forces that want us to be afraid and want us to be divided.
So when you got into the actual writing of the book, was it one of those where you got on the horse and now the horse started to just take off and go on its own direction? How much of it was, I've got all this experience and knowledge that I need to translate, versus how much of it was propellant discovery?
That's a great question that no one has ever asked me. Props to you. I am not one of those people out of whom words effortlessly pour, to say the least. Writing is really hard for me. I like the thinking. My daughter said, Ma, why do you write? Why are you a writer if writing's so hard? And I said, because when I read something good that I've written, it makes me feel better than anything else. I'm an introvert. I never in a million years thought I would be a public speaker. And I, honest to God, didn't aspire to, be a big shot. But I will tell you that it seemed really important. It seemed, as I mean, I am, I have a political sense of things, and injustice. This sounds really terrible, but injustice makes me angry. When people, and clearly being afraid and divided is not good for it's not good for our health. It's not good for our self-esteem and our sense of selves in the world. And it's not good for our communities. It's not good for our workplaces. It's not good. So I felt that it was really important to put these ideas into the world and be sort of a vessel for them. I mean, that's also, I am a good writer. I care about what I do. There was a lot of craft and effort involved. So it wasn't just, I didn't just cobble together a bunch of blog posts, but it just felt really important. And also, no one else was doing it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like cleaning a really dirty window. There's a lot of dirt on it, but you can see where you've been. These are still new ideas to people. I'm happy to say that the book's been out now for 10 years. A lot of the ideas that I helped put into popular consciousness, and also a lot of like the ageism being prejudice against your future self, that wasn't my idea, unique to me. Lots of people have come up with these things, but it is really gratifying and exciting to have people smack their head, what my son's ex-girlfriend called no shit, oh shit moment, right? Where, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, dang, that has some serious implications that I'm going to have to dig into. And that's why I kept at it.
But even though it came out 10 years ago, it is perpetually new, which I think is testament to the fact that of your being able to see what needs to be said in not an at the moment context,
Yeah.
but something that was going to be and is perpetual.
That's what I told my publisher. I mean, I had to self-publish it. No, I won't say their name. A publisher had an option on it, and I thought I wrote the whole thing because writing it was so hard. I just needed to like dedicate a bunch of time and do it. And I brought it in. I got a fancy agent and had a fancy meeting with the editor in chief and the editor and the marketing people. Da, 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 da. And the editor said, she looked at me and she said, "We're concerned that no one else is writing about this." And I knew right then it was over. I managed to squeak, instead of saying, "You are in the idea business. Are you effing kidding me?" I said, I said, "I think you should see that as a feature, not a bug." But in fairness to her, no one else came up with the kind of offer I thought it deserved. And I ended up self-publishing it with help from my partner who knows a lot about electronic publishing. And then 2 years later, sold it to a new division of Macmillan. They have been fantastic. And I said to her, "It's not going to sell like hotcakes, but it's going to sell and it's going to keep selling." And it will.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank
I
you very
do like
much.
how snarkiness seems to be an undercurrent from a lot of your positioning. I love it. I
I
just want
hope
to
not.
bring
I mean,
that
I
up
don't, I want to say that
in a
getting
good way.
older is hard. And I really, really try not to be judgy about anyone's fears or apprehensions. But, honestly, that editor, they deserve it for being so chicken shit.
And I agree with you too. Aging is not for the faint of heart, and
But,
we can't become our worst enemies because then it's a lost cause.
but everyone ages, including the fate of heart, right? You don't get to opt
Absolutely.
out unless you kill yourself. So, but the more we know about it, I mean, we age well by adapting, not pretending stuff isn't going to happen, but by acknowledging that change is going to happen, by being in charge of whatever we can, and by acknowledging that there's going to be things we can't control. And that's was my comment about powerful white men. I don't feel, it's hard to feel compassionate when someone is so arrogant, but I don't envy them because they think they can control things. And the way we age is subject to so many variables that are not in our control, no matter how wealthy and fortunate you happen to be. But one thing we can control is our attitudes. And unlearning is really hard. These things, these values have been drummed into us from childhood, to come full circle. But it is doable and it is free and it is liberating.
Powerfully said. Powerfully said. If someone listening to our conversation wants to start shifting their own ways of thinking about aging, in addition to buying This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, where would you suggest they begin?
Well, all change starts with awareness. Most bias is unconscious. It is deeply ingrained habit. Very few people want to say, "Oh yeah, I'm really biased, but I'm good with it." Maybe they are, and certainly I have entrenched ways of thinking. I don't have the energy to work on. So again, honest to God, no judgment. But but all change does start. Gandhi said that, the Buddha said that, starts within, starts with awareness, with looking at our own attitudes towards age and aging, so that we open our minds to those no shit, oh shit, like there's something here that I haven't thought about. And my own mindset and understanding needs to shift. So that's the premise of consciousness racing, that we look at our own attitudes. And then if you do it in a community, you'll be in community with me if you do it through reading my book, right? And there's more good books out there too now, that you open your mind to a new understanding. A sort of simple exercise, or simple, just something to think about, a thought experiment, is to think about how you use the words old and young, right? Did you say, "I feel so young," or think, "I feel so young"? Well, what do you really mean by young? Do you mean attractive? Do you mean competent? Do you mean with it? you can feel all those things at any age, just as you can feel incompetent and ugly and lost. I mean, I think back to my early teenage years, and man, I never felt so terrible about myself, again. So untether it from age. And when you use old or young, and typically in an ageist culture, we use young for a good thing. You're 60 years young. Um, don't get me started on language, please, really don't. But where you use typically young to mean a positive attribute and old to be a negative one, and use instead, you're entitled to all the negative feelings in the world, but use the actual feeling, right? Or capacity that old or young refers to, and uncouple it from age.
There is an uncanny, almost George Carlin-esque way of how you position. It's how we use words. It's how we interpret them. And that's such a powerful message that you've just given folks about rethinking and starting at a basic step. That's really encouraging.
Thank you. It's true. I mean it. I mean, you can tell. I've seen the evidence, and it's a better way to be in the world.
Any closing remarks, Ashton? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to say to listeners?
Not. I mean, I hope you'll consider thinking a little bit differently. I want to mention a website that I co-founded. I make $0 off it, believe me. It's called the Old School Hub, oldschool.info. We started it in 2018 as a resource bank, and it has since expanded. We bring people who are interested in ending ageism together. We help inform their projects. We have we as our tiny team of 4 people, we host a weekly open to anyone who is interested in thinking or talking about ageism, or just lurking while you listen to other people do it. Every Wednesday at 1:30 to 2:30 ET, if you want to find some people to talk to about this. So go to oldschool.info and you can find a zillion ways to learn about ageism at a pace and in a format that appeals to you.
And once again, where can listeners purchase their own copy of This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism?
Well, if you just enter it, you can come to my publisher's website. If you go to my personal website, which is thischairrocks.com, if you'll see a list on the side, if you go to blog, you'll be able to look up all my thinking and research for the last 20 years. There's a link to book, and you can read about the book, decide if you want to spend your money on it. It is available in electronic format and read by me. And also videos and all sorts of other stuff that I've done. And the link to my TED Talk. Listen to my TED Talk. It's free. It's only 11 minutes, and and spread it around.
Ashton, I can't thank you enough. The insight you gave to listeners today, it's a completely different way to think about aging, and especially about themselves. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos. You've been great. Absolutely terrific.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening to Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos, the podcast. Age well, stay curious, and live resiliently.
Subscribe and hit the bell so you'll never miss an episode of Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos.